This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and tonight I am joined by anyone who's not familiar with the Trench Warfare podcast and one of the most respected names in the offensive line discussion world, Brandon Thorn. Brandon, how we doing, man?
Doing good, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Appreciate you taking the time to come hang out with us and have a little bit of fun. How are things in your world? What's going on in the Trench Warfare podcast and with those hog mollies down there in the trenches?
Yeah, man, everything's going good for me. I'm staying busy, fortunately, and the podcast is going pretty well. I'm just now kind of getting into an article for Establish the Run. Same thing I did last year where I rank all 32 offensive lines and kind of give like a couple paragraphs for each unit. And that'll be out in the next month or so. And then this year I'm also doing the top 32 pass rushing units in the NFL as well. So just really busy with kind of constructing all of that. But I'm just thankful to be able to do it, man, because there's nothing I like more than talking about offensive and defensive lines. So that's what I'm staying busy on now. And of course, with the Scouting Academy, I'm doing all the videos that you see on all their social media accounts. I find those and cut them up and edit them as well. So yeah, man, it's just staying busy. And how about you?
Awesome. Yeah. Same idea, kind of getting through here and this weird stretch from a content creation standpoint, trying to figure out what to talk through. So I had set up the plan to kind of go position group by position group and try to find guys like yourself who are informed on the techniques and players and the kind of that world for each position group, and then go through there to kind of get Bills fans caught up. There's obviously a fair amount of excitement in the Bills Mafia community, and we're getting a fair amount of those kind of bandwagon fans who were there in the 90s and got beaten down more and more and more in the 2000s and had maybe given up a little bit of hope that now we're, hearing from their family or at the water cooler that, hey, they might be okay this year. You might want to pay attention to what's going on. So That's kind of been my pitch to, hey, jump aboard, listen to these shows. We'll get you up to date on who's on the team and what's going on. And then, for the folks who are already informed on there, we get a little bit deeper into some of the names that are out there. So that's awesome. And I appreciate it. I know Eric speaks the world of you and your input on there. Before we dive into all the fun, how did you decide to kind of go this route, this kind of specific into the subject matter expertise on the lines? Was it from where you played when you were younger, or just you saw a niche that somebody needed to be able to speak to the nuances of this part of the game?
Really both of those things. I played offensive line in high school, and I kind of just fell into it because I started off as a freshman as a quarterback, and then I got moved to tight end and defensive end as a sophomore, and then I got moved to offensive guard as a junior and senior. I kept getting bigger. I was like 265 in high school, about 6'3". So, I was just one of the bigger guys on the team, and they had a need at offensive line. I never wanted to ever play offensive line. Of course, most people don't. And, I wound up kind of appreciating it and really enjoying it, actually. And, I could have played at like a couple Division I AA schools, but got hurt my senior year and just kind of fell out of it, just fell out of kind of the whole grind of playing football, and decided to join the military instead. But my love for the game kind of always just kept growing. And as far as getting into offensive line play specifically, that's part of it. And then also when I joined social media in 2014, I think, I just kind of noticed that nobody was really talking about it, in any level of detail on Twitter at that time. So, I said, hey, let me just kind of dig into this and learn more about it. I already kind of had that love for it and just the NFL in general. So I just started picking people's brains, joined the Scouting Academy, talked to LaCharles Bentley a lot, went to his clinic, went to different clinics, and, hooked up with Duke Manyweather. And he's kind of been like my main mentor with offensive line. Him and Dan Hatman And then Ted Sundquist, I also kind of fell into a relationship with him, former general manager of the Broncos. He was a fellow Air Force veteran, living locally where I lived in Colorado at the time. So like those three guys really just kind of took me under their wing and taught me a lot about the game and the position. And I mean, it just kind of, has been an ongoing process since, and it's been pretty cool with some of the things that I've been able to do with it. It's been really a lot of fun.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for your service. Appreciate that. And, for fighting for the rest of us. And it's awesome to be able to hear a guy dive into, and as serious as you take it in, and many then, especially at Duke, you see just so much informative, the little clips. And I love the video breakdowns that you do sharing it. So we'll get into that tonight. And obviously that's where we did all our homework, all the prep work and everything. But, an hour before we went live, the Patriots decided to sign Cam Newton. So I'm pretty sure as content creator people in this world, we're obligated to talk about that for a minute here. I'll start with the fact that it's probably the least surprising thing. People have been calling this forever, but I will say I probably let myself fall into the trap of, since they hadn't done it yet, I kind of moved past it in my mind. And we were just talking about in the Cover One Premium Slack channel that it probably was finally a time where Cam's price tag lined up with the Patriots price tag, and that they had probably held a firm line because that's what they do. That's what Belichick does. But that he finally got to the point where, hey, I'm not getting that starting spot. I'd rather go sign a low base, low guarantee, incentive laden deal, but I get a chance to compete to start, than taking maybe a little bit more money, but I'm walking in knowing that I'm the backup and hoping for an injury, or just kind of throwing away a year. So I'm not shocked at that standpoint, but what are your first reaction thoughts on hearing that Cam Newton's going to the Patriots?
Well, I feel exactly the same as you, as far as noticing people mention it and talk about it early on in the offseason, and, kind of everyone thought it could happen. And then, as other storylines come about, we kind of just forget about it. So I'm kind of in the same boat there as you. And then, as far as my initial reaction is, I just think it's awesome for him because the amount of structure that he's going to have there, obviously, just the amount of, I think, probably job security right away. I mean, chances are is, obviously he's probably going to be the starter and, just kind of have the offense built around him. And, having a very good offensive coordinator doing that, and Josh McDaniels. So I think, granted there aren't great weapons there, which, I guess he's kind of used to that, in some senses. But he's going to have probably a really good system around him that's going to be built to his strengths in a lot of ways, I would imagine. Packages put in for him and just creative ways to utilize his skill set and things like that. So it'll be interesting, man. I mean, it's a really good situation for him from that standpoint. But like I said, obviously there's not a lot of great weapons there necessarily, but I think he can elevate the play of those guys if he's healthy and, things like that. So all in all, I think it's a good move for him, good move for the Patriots. And I'm excited about it as kind of a neutral fan of the NFL.
Yeah, no, I think that's very much where 90% of people are. This is the more exciting result of what could have been out there. Obviously coming from a more Bills-centric viewpoint, I'm actually happy. I'm not terribly concerned. Cam obviously didn't look right. For his sake, I hope he's healthy. When Cam Newton is healthy, the NFL is better and more exciting. Exactly. But it certainly looked like he had lost a bit there. So we'll see what he's got coming back here. But I will say, I think I compared it to like the Ryan Fitzpatrick signing in Miami. When you add a guy like that, you're not going to get one of those bottom 3 or 4 picks you need for this year to be Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Trey Lyles, whatever those guys may be. They're Trey Lance or whatever the other guy's name is. So that makes me happy. That I did have a piece in my mind that Belichick had this kind of get out of jail free card with, the most cachet any coach can possibly have. And you get to roll the dice that, hey, if we stumble onto another mid-round, late round guy with Jarrett Stidham, great. If not, hey, I'll take one of these younger guys. And that I always thought he was too good of a coach to, actually go 1-15 or anything horrible to get Lawrence, but I didn't want him to get the 4th pick and get Justin Fields or something like that. So I love it from that standpoint that it's a security blanket. I think the good and the bad is, Cam Newton's better than Jarrett Stidham or Brian Hoyer. I don't think there's any argument that he's not. I don't know that he's good enough that it scares me terribly. I think that he's probably got maybe even lesser offensive weapons than in Carolina, which is saying something, or at most neutral and again, a below average skilled position unit surrounding him. But I think that he brings some excitement to that game and brings a little bit more fun to that matchup and puts pressure on the Bills to continue to move forward. So I'm not terribly concerned. I don't love it that a division rival got better and that you gave Bill Belichick more weapons. I'll say I would guess that on a 1-year deal, we're going to see a lot of that early career running Cam Newton. I think that you put him with Sony Michel and Rex Burkhead and James White. You could do some fun combinations there so that maybe we see a bit more of the running package, but I'm not horribly concerned, but I don't love it that a team we play twice gets better.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, from a Bills perspective, I think you guys are certainly the favorites in the division. But yeah, it definitely makes it more competitive, more fun, more interesting. And, putting Cam with a team that has such a good defense and, just that environment, I think it's going to be good for him. And I think the big thing is his health, like you mentioned. I mean, we haven't really seen anything very close to that MVP level Cam, so it'll be interesting to see what he has. But I think he's in as good of a situation as really any other for him to succeed just from like a schematic standpoint. Yeah. And also I think having that defense as well is going to really just, that's going to help any quarterback. So that'll be good for him as well. So we'll see. And I think their offensive line is pretty good, probably a top 10 unit in the league. So it's, that's going to be helpful as well.
Certainly that interior, if David Andrews comes back and you're having Andrews and Tooney and,
Mason.
Mason and, everything
Isaiah
there.
Wynn's good.
If Isaiah Wynn's right and they get him really stepping forward, coming back into his third year, but really his second year coming off that terrible injury, they could have something special coming together there. And if you get that protection, a running game and that defense, that was kind of the mixture I was talking to Bills fans about with Jarrett Stidham. They're like, hey, maybe you could patch together where he could be okay when you're surrounding him with all those other pieces. Now you have that same recipe, but the guy that only has to do so much is Cam Newton. That's about as good of a situation as he could possibly ask for to kind of recuperate his value and his perception in the league. So I'm feeling worse about it as we talk about it. We'll switch gears here, and obviously the reason we wanted to bring someone as yourself onto the show is to be able to talk about what the Bills have put together, and I think it's going to be interesting to be able to figure out what are we actually going to switch to with the Bills' offensive line is something that they've built depth, and I think that they have one of the best combinations of actual depth in the NFL without maybe as much of the elite high-end talent that some other teams have, where, going into this camp, we may be talking about 10 NFL offensive linemen that could be there. And, in past years, Brandon Beane has traded away all kinds of guys from Wyatt Teller and Russell Bodine and guys that he's able to recoup day 3 draft picks for. And now you're talking about, going 10 guys who were on the Bills roster last year and Ryan Bates and Ike Botger, who were, dressing and playing games, and now have Trey Adams as an undrafted free agent after those top 8 actual, roster guys with real contracts. Before we get into the fun of the top end, are there any of the guys here, obviously I'm guessing you did some work early on Trey Adams when he was kind of the shining star as a sophomore, or anyone like a Ryan Bates or Ike Botker, these bottom end guys who stand out to you and you think have a chance to maybe make a hard decision or maybe make a more veteran guy like a Spencer Long or a Darrell Williams, one of those cut down day trade candidates because they forced their way onto a roster?
Yeah, I mean, I look at Ryan Bates initially. That's a guy who stands out to me. He's not somebody I did a full evaluation on, but I did see him in spurts at Penn State, and I really liked his projection inside, at one of the guard spots. It'll be interesting to see if that happens or where they play him, but I think he has a good enough hand usage to actually kind of stick out in camp and get the attention of Coach Johnson and the coaching staff, and just kind of maybe make it difficult to get rid of him, and make it an interesting conversation. So that's one guy that stands out to me that I like. And Adams is a guy I really liked initially when I saw him as a sophomore at Washington. And, he's been decimated by injuries. So it's kind of hard to say where he's at, but he's definitely somebody, if I was, running a team, I would like to bring him into camp and see what he looks like, just to get a good evaluation on him in person and to put him around, the pro game against pro competition and just kind of see how he responds, because I think that there's a good technical foundation there for him as a football player, as an offensive lineman. What he showed at Washington, I saw a lot of good fundamentals used by him. So just in terms of, getting to his landmarks, using his hands properly, good strike timing, things like that, you like to see from a college player that really stick out. I don't know that his physical traits are very special, anymore, especially with the injuries, but he's kind of one of those crafty type of guys that can, kind of exceed his physical tools with what he does, from the neck up and technique and stuff like that. So it'll just be interesting to see him in camp and just to see if he's healthy at all and if he can, kind of regain that athletic ability that he did have. So Adams and Bates to me stand out, but man, this offensive line, it's really cool, man. What, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but just like what they did last year and just the position that they're sitting in now, it's really cool how they built this unit.
Yeah, we'll certainly get to that from just a strategic standpoint with Brandon Beane, and that, you talk about a lot of people build the case of why the Eagles made their Super Bowl run was because they certainly had pieces in different places, but they had one of the deepest offensive and defensive line combinations in the NFL. And obviously that's not far off what Brandon Beane's doing here, where you're talking about, Trent Murphy and Darrell Johnson being the 9th and Vincent Taylor being the 9th, 10th, and 11th defensive linemen. That's a nice problem to have where you're not sure who's going to make a roster. And you get here where, Evan Boehm was starting games for Miami last year, and he's probably our 10th or 11th lineman. I kind of hope last year they got a little creative with Jason Kroom, with Voshawn Joseph, with Ladrin Waddle, where they kind of use the injured reserve spot strategically. I would love to sneak a year of Trey Adams in the Bills, kind of prestigious health and wellness center that they've created, where they were able to get some stretches where, it ended up after the season, we found out that 6, 7, 8 guys went in for surgery after the year was done because they were all playing and able to play at a high level through the programs that they had there to keep guys up and running. And I'd love to be able to get someone like Trey Adams a full year in an NFL program with NFL weight and conditioning, systems around him, get him right. And then that happens to be when, you can walk away from a Ty Nsekhe contract or his expires, or, you took this swing on Darrell Williams and you might get a year out of those guys. And all of a sudden now you can let Trey Adams come in and be the guy behind, Cody Ford and Dion Dawkins, or maybe he pushes Cody Ford, that kind of thing. I would love to be able to have that option to be able to hide him for a year, get him right, and then see if, like you said, from the neck up, he can connect that with, getting his body in the right shape for a year of not playing football for him for probably the first time in 10 years that he hasn't had to play the whole time, and you could kind of hide him.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, if you can stash him on the practice squad or something like that, I think that would be great. I mean, like I said, him and Bates, man, those are the kind of guys that I would like to get into my system and try to develop them for a year or two. And with the amount of depth that's in place, I think that that's very realistic. So, I mean, I really like the way that they're building things, and I get excited about it because a lot of these guys are players that I liked before they arrived. And, I really, it's just, I think a lot of like in terms of how they've built this unit in a lot of ways. So it's pretty cool.
Well, and obviously they value their pro scouting department with Dan Morgan, with Joe Shane, and that when you're going out and you're snagging the Dion Sekis and John Felicianos of the world, where they had glimpses, they had moments, but they didn't have a ton of opportunity. And then they come here and they show that they're capable of doing that. They're investing in earlier draft picks, and we'll get into obviously the two potential cornerstones here to see what we have in Dion Dawkins and Cody Ford. But one of those guys this year in that same mold of, kind of a rough patch, had some highlights earlier. What have you seen in Darrell Williams in that, going from an all-pro season in Carolina, then some really rough injuries? I've tried to convince myself that last year was trying to rush back from injury, then playing out of position, then switching sides and playing out of position. And that I'm wondering if, this kind of contract is how you want to take a swing like that. 1 year, $2.5 million, very little guaranteed. And that if you happen to rekindle any of that value for a guy who's not all that old, still in his 20s, that maybe you could snag something here. Do you think there's anything left in the tank? Or I'm not sure how much you got to dive into his year last year and what was there. But if they have a chance to snag anything from that potential he showed, that'd be awful exciting to be able to plug into a line like this.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy worth signing at the price tag that they signed him for. I'll say that, but I never really was a big fan of him going back to Oklahoma. I think that season he got named All-Pro was kind of, that was very inaccurate in my opinion. Kind of like the Jack Conklin All-Pro selection, kind of reminded me of that. Just like I just never thought that he was an all-pro caliber player. He's been solid, for a couple of years in his NFL career, but I think that's all he really is a solid football player. Ideally, you want to have him as kind of your swing offensive guard, interior guy. I mean, I don't like him at tackle as much as I do at guard. I think that the guard position probably suits him a little more. So, I don't see him winning a starting job, that's for sure. And I would say he has a shot at being maybe the seventh offensive lineman. But even then, I mean, he's going to have to beat out Spencer Long for that, and then Long can play center. So, and I don't think Williams can do that. So I think he has the leg up there for getting one of those last roster positions. I think it's going to it would be a stretch to say that he would make the roster, but it's definitely a great guy to bring into camp just because of the starting experience that he does have. And he kind of fits the mold of how they kind of like building it. It seems like on the interior, especially at the guard position, big, strong, physical, those type of guys who can kind of set the tone at those guard positions. So he kind of fits that kind of that outline that they like at the position. So it makes a lot of sense, but I've just never been a big fan. I think he's a little bit overrated. Last year was bad. Obviously he got tore up at tackle. Part of that is probably because of injuries and things like that. So, he had things working against him, but even when he was healthy, I didn't think he was much more than just an average starter. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a stretch that he'll make the roster, but a great guy to have on the roster for now.
That's where I view it as well. And I think that there's a chance that if he's healthy and if he's right, I love that call, the seventh offensive lineman. He could be a guy that if they feel good about Ryan Bates having that versatility, and last year Ryan Bates, he wasn't great, but he had versatility to play all five spots. That has value on game day that, you're not hoping that he plays, but if he does, you can plug him in about anywhere. If Dion Seki is your swing tackle for this year, if you are able to kind of hide Trey Adams, or let's say the opposite, let's say Trey Adams looks good in preseason and training camp, and you're nervous that you can't hide him on practice squad and you can't expose him to waivers. I could see a scenario where if Darrell Williams is healthy, he lets you make Spencer Long be that cut down day trade candidate where you probably have the best chance of getting a decent draft pick return for Spencer Long than you would trying to trade Darrell Williams. So if you see that Darrell Williams is healthy and he can be the backup to Quentin Spain and John Feliciano, maybe that gives you some versatility to make a different move that has better perceived value around the rest of the league. And I think that's probably our upside here. I'd love to tell myself a story that he goes back to that starting caliber right tackle. And even if it was a little little inflated, like you said, with the Jack Conklin All-Pro. That makes me laugh. But even if you were to go back to something like that, it's probably at best a average starting spot, which is nice if that's your 6th, 7th, 8th guy that's there and just competing for a spot. It makes me a little nervous. You said you didn't like a slow-footed guy from Oklahoma, so I'm a little afraid to ask, what are your thoughts on Cody Ford and whether he should be the right tackle of the future for the Bills?
So I think Ford was better than Williams at Oklahoma.
Excellent.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Now, that said, what we saw last year and kind of what we saw from him coming out, just a little delayed coming out of his stance in pass protection against high-level rushers in terms of being able to really explode, expand, create space, and get to a landmark without the guy beating him around the corner or without his hips opening up prematurely. Now, most right tackles in the NFL struggle with that, so it's not like he's in this unique position. And I'm not going to, dogging on him or anything like that, but that is the weakness of his game, I think. And, but the thing is, I think he has good footwork in terms of his ability to move laterally and just kind of be smooth. He has good center of gravity. And he moves pretty well for being such a big dude. It's just that initial explosiveness and quickness, I don't think is, very high level. So it's more kind of mediocre, average, and that gets him in trouble. Now he can really become more efficient, I think, and really eliminate any sort of wasted movement, false step. And because I notice sometimes I think of a play that still stands out to me against J.J. Watt in the playoffs. And this was when Watt was coming back, obviously, from an injury, and, he came back early, and there was a rush where he beat Ford around the edge, and you can just see the trajectory of Ford's footwork. He kind of, it's not quite a false step, that initial step with his right foot coming out of his stance, but it's almost a little bit too lateral. He doesn't get vertical enough, or he doesn't create enough space, and that allows Watt to just beat him around the corner. And this is a hobbled Watt. Granted, he tore his pec, so it's not lower half, but still, like, he just kind of swiped him around the corner. And, you don't want to be losing in that situation that way. And I have a feeling that that's probably going to be his Achilles heel if he stays at tackle just for the rest of his career. We're going to kind of see that. Now, that doesn't mean he can't be an above average starter, or maybe even very good potentially, if he cleans things up and becomes really pristine with that footwork, because it kind of reminds me of what we saw from La'el Collins initially when he moved out to tackle with the Cowboys. He kind of, his footwork and everything, the first couple of years that he was playing tackle, he kind of saw the same sort of struggles. And then last year totally corrected his footwork, really, almost pristine footwork from him last year. And then all the people that were saying that he didn't have the athletic ability now didn't have any excuse to say, like, once they saw him overcome that, it was clearly just a footwork technical landmark issue. It wasn't an athletic ability issue. And I think that Ford is in a similar boat. I don't think that he lacks the athletic ability to do it. I just think that he needs to clean things up. That's not a given, but I think it's possible. So that's really his biggest issue, and how I can see him correcting it and kind of providing an example of a guy who kind of had a similar deal there with La'el Collins. And they're kind of similar in some ways. Just their physical profile and then how dominant they could be in the run game. So if he can just get things cleaned up, man, I think he has a chance to be a really good tackle still. But that said, I did think he was ideally suited for guard coming out. And that's what I put in my scouting report. It's on my Twitter account. If you search my name and Ford, I wrote a detailed report on him. And I thought that he was a little bit better fit inside. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out the next couple years. But, all things considered, I think he's a guy you can win with. And hopefully he eventually can become a guy you can win because of. But he's going to need to correct some things for that to happen at tackle.
Yeah, and I think the key is to be able to figure that out this year. I think that they have this year. They have the luxury of still having Dion Dawkins on a contract, even though he's 35 years old. They obviously basically rotated last year. They almost split exactly 50-50 from a snap count standpoint. I think they can go at it again this year. I think that he showed enough potential, and that obviously you talked about the game with J.J. Watt. He actually played really well against Von Miller and DeMarcus Lawrence, had really nice moments in the Denver and Dallas games. Some of that is because they're smart about how they use, Lee Smith is obviously an exceptional blocking tight end. Daniel is bringing it up here. He's basically a sixth offensive lineman. It's fantastic. Yes. I even joke that when they got hurt, and it was, you talked about Ryan Bates being better internally. If somebody got hurt in game, I'd almost rather Lee Smith play tackle than Bates when he was the versatile backup guy. We had a game where both Dion got dinged up for a second and Dion Dawkins got hurt, and we were kind of scrambling to figure out, okay, who's coming in here? And in the moment, I was like, put Lee Smith in there. He's probably going to keep us upright. But Dion Dawkins, Dawson Knox also showed pretty good potential early on, and obviously I love him being in the locker room with Lee Smith, and that's a fantastic way to build that acumen that, you can be smart about that today. They're going to run a lot of 11 personnel. You're going to have a tight end out there fairly often, especially with someone of the potential of Dawson Knox. So you can be smart about where you put that and how you utilize it. And that I'm comfortable enough going into this year that I felt the same way. I thought Cody Ford was going to be an elite level guard and just a powerful mauler. And I still think that's possible. But you have John Feliciano's contract coming up this year. You have Dion Dawkins' contract coming up next year. I feel confident Cody Ford is one of those spots going forward. Right. I hope it's right tackle from a value standpoint. But your worst case scenario is John Feliciano walks, you kick him into guard, and then you spend the money on getting, or the early draft pick on getting a right tackle next year. And you go, or heck, maybe they stumbled into that with Trey Adams. And then all of a sudden you can patch that back together with that kind of thing. So I'm hopeful that we'll find that out this year. And I'm obviously crossing my fingers that Ford is the answer at right tackle. At the other tackle, now we're talking about, you're seeing some of these contracts get thrown out there. DJ Humphries gets $15 million a year, and some of the, scarier numbers out there that you get for, Trent Brown and people like that. Dion Dawkins' contract is up after this year. He, in my mind, had a nice rookie year, took a pretty big step back when he lost both Richie Incognito and Eric Wood all at once, and had, Vlad Dukas as the veteran guy next to him. Step back up this year, looked really good with Quentin Spain next to him. Quentin Spain's coming back again, signed for a 3-year deal. What are your thoughts on Dion Dawkins? And, it seems to me that just starting left tackle in the NFL, the going rate's now $15 million. It's just what it's going to cost. Is that simply the cost of doing business, or do you think he's a guy you'd be concerned investing in that and the risk of finding another starting caliber guy in the draft or in free agency? What are your thoughts overall on what the Bills have in their left tackle?
Yeah, so this is really interesting to just kind of go through the whole process of what I've thought about Dawkins coming out of Temple. I thought he was a guard coming out, and then they, put him at tackle right away, has 11 starts as a rookie and struggled last year, 2018. I thought, he started 16 games the last 2 years. So that in itself is a good thing, just to be that durable and available and, reliable and all that kind of stuff is awesome. But I thought he was just a guard coming out of Temple because I didn't really see the pass sets holding up in the NFL on an island. And I think the most impressive thing about Dawkins is the level of improvement that he has shown from his tape last year in 2019. If you compare that to 2017, it's a pretty dramatic improvement. So that gives me a lot of reason for hope for him to turn into an even better player than he was last year, just because the trajectory is certainly moving in the right direction. I thought he got a lot more comfortable last year as a pass protector, and his landmarks and set points were a lot better. He wasn't undersetting or oversetting guys. Typically undersetting was what he was doing in the past, and he wasn't really doing that a whole lot last year from the tape that I saw. I didn't watch every rep, but I saw a lot of Bills film. I saw all the Bills games. I just, every time I watched the tape, I've kind of watched different guys, and I peeked over at him a lot because I watched every rep of Spain. So I saw a good amount, and the stuff that I saw, I feel comfortable saying that he was certainly an above average left tackle last year. And, I just think that he has a chance to jump up again, and maybe get into that very good range. I certainly think it's possible. His foundational traits, play strength, power, competitive toughness. I mean, he really is an enforcer on the offensive line, and you don't see a lot of guys like that at left tackle. He may be the most physically imposing left tackle in the game. I mean, he's certainly in the conversation, in my opinion, now that Jason Peters is kind of on the, the wrong side of 30 and things like that. I mean, he kind of was a guy who jumps up when I think about it off the top of my head. Who else? I mean, Taylor Lewan, maybe.
Yeah.
A couple of, maybe one, Trent Williams, of course, Tyron Smith. But, I mean, as far as just purely being a physically imposing presence on the offensive line with a really good anchor and a really good ability to generate movement off the ball, those are kind of the bread and butter things that Dawkins brings. And now that his pass pro is at a serviceable level, I think, he jumped up to me in the preseason. I had him in like the 5th tier of left tackles, which is like a below average starter. He jumped up 2 tiers, in my opinion. I think he's a tier 3 left tackle in the NFL, a good starter, above average. And I think that he has room to climb even higher. So we'll see, but that's kind of where I view him now. And I'm a big fan of his game because of those core traits that I mentioned. He's a lot of fun to watch, man.
No, that's awesome. And I think that's exactly what Bills fans have seen as well. We went on that same roller coaster where, we weren't sure if he was a tackler or a guard. He had a surprisingly encouraging rookie season, having to be rushed in for Cordy Glenn being injured. All of a sudden we thought we stumbled onto something. Then you take away all the stability and talent around him. He's out on an island playing left tackle for the first time, against professional level guys as a second-year player. Now all of a sudden he's struggling. He's looking bad. We're not really sure what we have. Then it comes back in this third year. We bring in, and we'll talk about Mitch Morris here in a minute. We bring in kind of that captain and the calling out all the blocking schemes and everything. He steps forward from a maturity standpoint. Obviously was team voted captain. Really has taken a huge leadership role. When Josh Allen got everybody together down in Florida, you saw Stephon Diggs, you saw Cole Beasley, John Brown, all the rookies, both Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, and the only offensive lineman down there was Dion Dawkins. And just having him be a part of the offense to that degree, I think matters. I think that's real, that they see him as such a big piece of what's going on. They even showed him running routes against Isaiah McKenzie, which was fun to be able to watch. But I agree. I'm excited, and I think that the risk of today, I don't, like you said, I think tier 3 is very fair. I don't think he's ever going to be the Tyron Smith, Trent Williams kind of athlete. He's not that as a human. But when you have an above average starting left tackle, you don't mess with that. And I just think some Bills fans are worried, and don't get me wrong, 5 years, $75 million is a scary price tag. And then when that tweet comes out, it's going to be like, oh my God, that's so much money. I can't believe they paid him like a franchise left tackle. And I would just caution people with that term that, yeah, there are 2 or 3 just transcendent talents, but then you have a whole bunch of other teams that probably wish they had a Dion Dawkins to pay at left tackle. And that if that's simply what the market rate is for a starting caliber left tackle, and we have a guy who's still young, healthy, playing well, I'm happy to pay him, and that I'm okay if that's what the market going rate is. I don't want to mess that up, and I certainly don't want to roll the dice in this rookie contract window and evaluation window on Josh Allen. So that's reassuring here, but I'm certainly on board with even a scary price tag like 5 years, $75 million. I'm happy to see him get it.
Yeah, I mean, when you line up 32 starting left tackles in the NFL and you start racking and stacking them, and then Dawkins comes up in like the top 15 or higher, just maybe at like 14, 15, maybe a little higher, best case. I mean, there you go. I mean, that says all you really need to say. I mean, like you said, there's 2, 3, 4 elite guys at each position on the offensive line, some a little more. And after that, you want a guy you can win with. And, that has sort of specialty areas of his game that he is very good in. And I think Dawkins has that in some of the things that I mentioned. So he's a unique left tackle, man. I mean, he's in terms of how he wins, like not a lot of left tackles play the game the way that he plays the game. So I think it's really, he's a really cool piece to have on an offensive line, and he's a guy that you can win with. So he's a lot of fun. He's just a very fun player to study on tape. And just, I mean, this offensive line, man, I know I keep going back to it, but like, I just want to say, like, I think the way that they've built it and bringing Coach Johnson over from the Colts, I think he made a big difference. Him bringing over, signing lease, I mean, all the signings they did last year, but just the mentality that the guys that they signed play the game with, to go along with somebody like Dawkins, because obviously they had four of the 5 starting positions on the offensive line were new last year. And I mean, every guy that they brought in is like a dog on the field. And that sort of mentality is just, it's incredible, man. I mean, this is such a unique offensive line. So hopefully fans appreciate it, because it's a lot of fun to watch, man. Even if guys get over aggressive at times and they maybe strike a guy a little early and whiff here and there, as long as they can limit those things, man, they can really like throw some guys around, and it's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the interior of this line, 3 brand new guys last year, and trying to figure out a guy like John Feliciano that fans didn't really know anything about. Then a guy like Quentin Spain, who kind of fell into their lap and was a weird late cut
in Tennessee, man.
Oh yeah, a weird late cut in Tennessee, and then he kind of sat out there unsigned for a while. And then the Bills were like, "Hey, we'll let you come in and compete for a starting spot here. We already threw $4 million at Spencer Long, but screw it, you can come on in and compete for it." And he not only did that, but earned himself a nice 3-year, $15 million deal, and kind of has himself set up as a piece here. And just a quick side note, Quentin Spain won the Bills Ironman contest for the offseason, meaning his workout performance measures and percentage of improvement across all positions on the team. He won that this year.
Oh, wow.
And looks ridiculous. Like he was a guy who I joked last year in training camp, he defied the laws of physics. Like, he looked morbidly obese. He looked like one of those guys you would joke about having those insane beer bellies. And he'd explode out of his stance and he'd move like an NFL lineman. But when you watched him walk around, he looked like a refrigerator wearing a jersey. Like, it was just so ridiculous how fat that he looked. It was crazy. But he moved, so it didn't matter. And you see him now, it's crazy. He's wearing the belt around his waist in the picture, showing it, and it looked like a different human. So I'm really excited to see. And the idea that a guy just got that payday and then did that this offseason, that's what you want to see.
Dude, we could talk about Quentin Spain all night. I love Spain, man. I mean, like, he's one of my guys, man. Me and Duke did a all underrated offensive line for 2015 and 2016. Spain was on it in 2015. So, I mean, he's been a guy I've been on for a long time, man. Dude, like, I know what you're saying. Like, when you see him on tape, he doesn't look like a guy that can move the way that he moves, but his agility is really impressive. And that's going back to West Virginia as well. Like, he's a really good athlete at the position, and it's not combine athleticism, it's play speed. I mean, like, he plays the game, with really good speed, and he has good feet, and he's nasty, man. I mean, he sets the tone up front. He's physical. I got to work with him a little bit this offseason and do some film stuff for him. And I just really appreciate the way he plays the game. I mean, that left side is filthy, man, as far as like just the physicality, the competitive toughness on this offensive line is just like outrageous. It's awesome, man. So that's cool to hear about Spain, though. I didn't know all that stuff. So that's awesome, man. It makes me even more excited now.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where, and it was shocking, obviously, that was my experience with him, is that he didn't strike me as the guy who took his conditioning work the most seriously of everybody on the team, but I didn't really care because he did his job. He went out there, he played nasty, he was physical. I'm like, whatever. You don't have to look amazing to play that way. And I mean, he looks fantastic. It's awesome. It's going to be really exciting to see how that kind of transitions for him over there.
One more point about that is I think it's kind of worthwhile to point out Dawkins played better alongside Spain, and Spain played maybe the best year of his career in between Morse and Dawkins, and it kind of was a good blend right there. And I think that's important. It's something that's overlooked a lot because Dawkins in 2018, I think he played alongside, was it Ducasse?
Yes.
And Wyatt Teller later in the year. I mean, you know, that's something to consider whenever you're watching a guy on the line. Who's playing next to him? How much do they have to compensate for that guy? And that can really take a guy out of his comfort zone and really kind of diminish his game in certain aspects. So, and it can also have the inverse effect. So I think that's something to point out, that they kind of played off each other. And I think there's a real chemistry there between them and other guys on the offensive line. But I think that's important. A guy like Donald Penn comes to mind because he's made every guard he's ever played with better, including Eric Flowers last year. And in the past, Kelechi Osemele and Gabe Jackson before that. Every guard that he's played with has had his career year alongside of him. So a guy like that can really have a lot of impact on the other guys next to him, which I think is pretty cool.
Well, and that brings us to this final piece. I think that Bills fans knew, obviously, they knew Brandon Beane valued center. They paid Eric Wood, and then right after that, we get the tragic, neck injury that takes him out. And talk about a guy who has made a transformation. He just beat Brandon Beane in a mile run contest and looked like a chiseled specimen. It was ridiculous.
Saw that.
Oh yeah. So, God bless him. But, obviously showed that they valued it from an organizational standpoint, from a budgeting standpoint. And then all of a sudden he retires last minute, was forced to retire last minute, and they scrap that together, and it's just an ugly season. And now we go into this offseason, last year, and that we knew it was going to be a number one, spending element. And, I don't think people knew exactly who was going to be at the top of that list, but then they jump out right there day one. You make Mitch Morris, at the moment, the highest paid center in NFL history. And he's since been one-upped once or twice by a couple other guys here, but he's still right there, $11 million and change a year. And it's kind of hard for fans to know, how do we know if we are getting our money's worth at center? It's kind of hard to know that. And you see him all during the year. It's kind of tough in my mind to figure out how a guy can snap the ball and then be pulling and out in front of everybody. And he just is awesome in space. He moves great. And I, as a layperson, have to assume that some of that continuity and communication and the way that they played so well together has to go to a guy like that, being that veteran presence, making the scheme calls and the shift calls and the different line calls where those protections are going to lean. Is that right to credit some of that there? And do you think that he had a hand in why some of those guys played above their head as much as they did compared to their previous career performance?
Yeah, the most surprising guy on the line to me last year was Feliciano, because I watched him in Oakland the time that he did play it, and I always noted how physical he was. And, kind of a similar mold that we've been talking about. But he always was so aggressive that he was pretty bad in pass protection in the times that I saw him. So for him to play as well as he did last year, I think is probably more of a credit, aside from himself, obviously, and Coach Johnson, I think is probably to Morse for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. Just always getting the offense in the right protection, identifying the mic, and then adjusting and, just keeping the protection sound for the most part and allowing other guys to play free and to put other guys in good positions where they don't have to do too much or, just worry about a lot. So I think that Morse probably elevated Feliciano more than anybody else. And, Morse himself is a guy, personal favorite of mine as well, going back to Kansas City. I mean, I know he started 16 games last year for the first time since 2016, which was great to see because he had, I think, a really bad foot injury after the 2016 season. And
that's just scary concussions. He's had
concussions as well.
Yeah, had a little bit of a stretch there where that was a concern.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And he leads with his head quite a bit. He did last year as well. That's just kind of how he plays a game, but that's part of why he's able to kind of pick off linebackers in space, because he'll just like lunge at them and he's really good at it. It just, hopefully he could stay safe and, everything like that. But I think the lower half stuff really limited his ability to move, because that's what he does so well. Ever since you watch him in Missouri playing left tackle, he was such a good mover. Putting him inside at center, I mean, it was like all of a sudden when Kansas City did that in 2015, they had one of the best centers in the NFL. He was special when he was playing in Kansas City those first 2 years. And then things just kind of dramatically took a fall off. And for Bean to go out and sign him to that deal, I mean, it took, some serious balls to do that. And, but to me, it wasn't that much of a stretch at all, because I was like, dude, if this guy can just be healthy again, you got close to an elite center. And I think we saw a lot of that last year, and it was awesome to see. I mean, like you said, the pin pull series that you guys ran, that the offense had last year, was beautiful. I mean, one of my favorite things to watch in the NFL last year was the Bills run pin pull. And largely because of Mitch Morris and how good Spain and Feliciano, to me, last year were two hammers, basically. And that's what they did, just hammering that nose tackle so Mitch can get free and get out in space. And I mean, that was just one of the best things to watch in the league. And I mean, Morris getting out, moving, basically kind of like skip pulling almost, with his shoulders squared to the line of scrimmage and just kind of surveying the defense as he wraps around the tackle and then picks off linebackers and DBs. I mean, he's one of the 2 or 3 best in the NFL, like right below Jason Kelsey. I mean, he's kind of like in that type of company. So Morse, I mean, the stuff that he does for the running game and then the protections is, invaluable. So he's a critical piece, and let's just hope he can continue to stay healthy, because he's vital to the success of the offense.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable to show the value that he has. And it was awesome last year to see these plays where, I see, you obviously the camera follows the ball, so you don't see exactly who's going to be where, but all of a sudden you're 12 yards downfield outside the numbers. And hey, what's Mitch Morris doing out in front of Devin Singletary? How did he get there? It was so fun to go back and watch him. And like you said, I'm not obviously familiar with the exact terminology, but where he almost took that skip step and like would kind of strafe along there for a minute, and then would just explode, down there. And he can move for a big guy. Yeah. It's crazy to be able to see a guy like him move as gracefully as what he does. It's awesome to be able to see. And, we went across a lot of names tonight. And one of the most exciting things for me was that they put that together last year, but it was kind of on the fly. They signed 7 and drafted an 8th offensive lineman last year. So having that many different guys all together have to come together. They shuffled it around for a while. You didn't know if it was going to be Spencer Long or Feliciano or Spain. The only guys you knew for sure were going to be Morris and Dawkins. You didn't know if it was going to be Cody Ford or maybe Ford at guard or Inseki at tackle. And then all of a sudden, towards the 3rd preseason game, they kind of settled in, and then they even talked about it more. And then they went into the season, and it held strong throughout pretty much the whole season. I love the fact that the top 9 offensive linemen, all the way down to Ike Bacher, Ryan Bates, all came back this year. Plus, you added Evan Boehm, you added Darrell Williams, you added Trey Adams. So now you have 12 guys that you're talking about, all with the capability of making a roster. I'm really excited of what that one more year, Bobby Johnson's still there, same assistant group, same style, same approach, same scheme, same offensive coordinator. Everything is all together in that same mode. I'm really excited to see what that allows them to do going into the second year all together in the same scheme. And is that something where you think there's legitimate value in, people throw around that continuity term, especially this year with no mini camps, no OTAs, that the teams with continuity might get a leg up here. Is that something you think Bills fans should be excited about coming back this year with that many, the all top 9 offensive linemen returning and all 5 starters likely returning?
Oh, 100%, man. I mean, that's huge to me. And continuity is always important. It's going to be even more important with the offseason that we're facing. So, yeah, I mean, when I'm doing my rankings now, they're going to be probably a top 10 unit for me. going into 2020, awesome. Top 10 to 12, most likely, maybe higher. I mean, last year I had them 10th at the midway point, I think, or somewhere 10 to 12 or so. And I mean, I think that they're only going to get better, and they're going to have a leg up on a lot of units that are replacing starters and having to kind of fit them in, with minimal practice time and, time to kind of get familiar with one another. So, yeah, man, I think you're definitely onto something there, and I agree. I think it's a big leg up, and I think that this is going to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL last year. I don't know if they have really an elite ceiling, but definitely a very good ceiling and a high floor as well. And that's, one of the best combinations you can ask for, as an offensive line. So, and, very well coached. I think Coach Johnson is an underrated name in offensive line coaching circles, just as far as guys that, we talk about on Twitter and that people know about. But I think Coach Johnson getting to be the head man last year after being an assistant really kind of made a name for himself. And I think it's just going to continue to build this year. I'll be surprised if it doesn't, and of course, barring injury and all that stuff. But even then, you have a lot of depth. So, yeah, I feel good about this line being really good.
Awesome. And I agree. I'm really excited to hear you kind of confirm what our hopes are on our side, have somebody objective from the outside come in and confirm that is a really exciting feeling. And, we might not even know what the definitions of depth are like we might this year. If all of a sudden, we don't know what rosters are going to look like. We don't know what a positive COVID test might do to a team and how long you have to quarantine or pull that guy out. And, God forbid anything, the other crazy things that could happen. Let's hope that we're talking about football here in the fall. But with that going forward, I have a feeling that a team like this where, I've even heard some possibilities they may expand some of the roster things, they may expand some of the practice squad items. I think it really could help a team like the Bills who have this much depth that you might be able to keep a couple of those extra guys around to make sure that you're in a position to survive some of those things. And I'd love to see it that you can afford to have Ike Bacher as your 12th or 13th offensive lineman hanging out just in case. And that kind of thing, you can afford to have, Darrell Williams and Spencer Long and Evan Baum all as, potential plug and play guys internally. And, just having that many different pieces is an exciting potential to be able to go into this kind of season with all the unquestioned or all the unanswered questions and all the potential issues that nobody really knows the answers to now. That's an exciting proposal. So really appreciate your time tonight, Brandon. This was awesome. It was a lot of fun to be able to go through. This is exactly what we want to bring to Bills fans is bring on objective third-party views to be able to go through. I try not to be a homer, but I get excited now and then with the guys on our roster. So having somebody come in and be able to kind of speak to what the Bills have put together here in this position group. Before we take off, let them know where to find you, maybe what's coming up next on Trench Warfare and anything else you got on Establish the Run.
Yeah, so I'm working on just 2 different guests right now for Trench Warfare for next week. I don't know which guy is going to come on, but either way, I think people are going to really enjoy the guests that I'm going to have on next week. And then Establish the Run, like I said, the top 32 pass rushing units, top 32 offensive line units in the NFL. Both those articles are going to be out in the next month or so. And then throughout the entire season, I'm going to be doing my mismatch article and updating the rankings weekly. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So definitely look out for those things for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You guys were awesome in the chat tonight. Appreciate it. All the questions coming in. Looking forward to it. We'll continue to do these as we go. We're going to have more position previews each week all the way up through the preview show. We'll also speak to any breaking news like Brandon and I obviously touched on the Cam Newton signing with the Patriots tonight. That's an exciting breaking news item. We'll continue to bring those forward. Check out everything at cover1.net. Eric's going crazy with video breakdowns, just going through all the different fun that's out there. Really appreciate it tonight, Brandon. Appreciate you guys in the chat. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.